Before we begin our final panel, we wanted to share a quick video from the San Francisco Vote 16 campaign for Proposition G. Vote 16 USA is a national campaign organized by Generation Citizen that supports efforts to lower the voting age to 16, rightfully so. Prop G was on the ballot in San Francisco last November. It earned 49.2% of the vote, just below the threshold to pass. This was still a huge accomplishment for a youth-led campaign during a pandemic, and we are sure it will pass in the future. Let's hear from some of the youth organizers fighting to lower the voting age in San Francisco.
We've had to grow up fast.
We work to help support our families.
We advocate for nuestros seres queridos.
And we're organizing our families and friends for meaningful change.
We are leading our nation.
Now it's time we have a vote.
It's time to say yes to Prop G.
When we start voting at 16,
we are more likely to vote as adults,
which is really good for the future of our democracy. But our future can't wait.
We are fighting back against crises at a scale no other generation has ever seen.
And we need the power of the vote
to make our voices count now.
Vote yes on Prop G.
It's good for democracy.
Our best bet in preserving our democracy is expanding our democracy.
Vote yes on Prop G.
Vote yes on Prop G.
Vote yes on Prop G. Because we deserve a say in our future.
Amazing. With student voice in mind, let's move on to our final panel. Andrew Brennen, National Geographic Explorer and Education Fellow, will speak with Youth on Board, Kentucky Student Voice Team, and a member of the Prince George's County School Board and Student Voice regarding students in seats of power. Remember to keep your questions in the Q&A and use the chat for reactions. Please welcome Merrit, Emmanuelle, Dan, and Ninah. Take it away, guys.
Welcome, everyone. It's been such a great day of amazing conversations and information, and I know that this panel will be as informative. So my name is Andrew. I'm the co-founder of the Kentucky Student Voice Team, as well as an education fellow with National Geographic. Over the past several years, as a society, we've begun to refocus on the critical role student activists play in fighting for education, environmental, and economic justice. From advocating that policymakers invest in more guidance counselors and trauma experts in school before doubling down on metal detectors and police officers, to the students insisting that government fast track tests and vaccinations that communities of color need before fast tracking school reopening. Students are holding adult-led educational institutions accountable on a regular basis. And given the kind of self-evidently valuable role that students can play in the education policymaking process, it should really come as no surprise that schools across the country, at the insistence and at the urging of student leaders, are taking steps to institutionalize student power within the policymaking process. So in today's panel, we're going to explore the different ways that that's happening at the school level, the district level, the state level, and even really the federal level now, and hear from some of the activists who are leading these efforts on the ground. So with that, I'm excited to turn the floor over to today's panelists to introduce themselves. So if each of you could start with just your name, pronouns, organization that you're affiliated with, and tell us kind of how you first got involved with the fight for education justice. And Ninah, maybe we could start with you.
Oh, geez. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you all again for just joining us on a Saturday, nonetheless. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Ninah Jackson, and I'm a senior in Prince George's County, Maryland. My pronouns are she, her. And I would say my most notable role at the moment is serving as the student member of the Prince George's County Board of Education, which is the second largest school district in the state of Maryland and the 20th largest school district in the United States. However, my interest in my engagement in educational advocacy and fighting against educational inequity didn't start with my role as a student board member. It started with me serving as a class president in my local high school and working with my administrators to advance projects aimed at increasing equity among students. It started with me getting involved with student government on the county level and the state level, because I realized that there's power and strength in numbers, and that we have, if nothing else, a mandate to serve those in our community and those around us, and to utilize our privilege when we recognize that we have it. Throughout the past 4 years of my school experience, I've tried to commit myself to uplifting the marginalized voices in my community, and by focusing and realizing that our schools serve as the center of our communities and that we should treat our schools as such. So that leads me to being with you all today and getting into sharing the rest of my story and the rest of my engagement with the rest of this panel.
Thank you so much, Ninah. Emanuelle.
Thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm Emmanuel Sippy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior in high school in Lexington, Kentucky, and I co-lead the Kentucky Student Voice team with incredible folks like Andrew. We have worked across the state to address issues of education inequity, from research to legislative campaigns and storytelling. And so I really got started in this work thinking about the ways in which I didn't belong as a student in school and I didn't feel a sense of community, and working with organizations like the Student Voice team have really found a parallel universe. I think that oftentimes we think about this work in its future orientation and in what we're trying to do in terms of bending the arc, but it also creates spaces for students like myself to really find community and to learn beyond the traditional confines of our schools.
Thank you, Emmy. And Dan?
Hey everybody, I'm Daniel Morales. I am currently representing Boston, the Boston Student Advisory Council alongside Youth on Board. And essentially what we do is we thrive off the voice of youth. We realize that in this place, it is a necessity that youth voices are put in place and actually hold impact into what is going on both politically and societally. These things are important because the future is within our youth, all right? The youth are made to persevere, and we recognize that, and we then push onto that and give them the resources needed to, I guess you say, utilize their faculties and go against the system. Now, alongside this, I also do a lot of work with BPS Equity and Strategy on their student designer team. And essentially, the process in that is that me and a bunch of our students, we got selected through an interview process in which we were able to, I guess you could say, be appointed onto a group of people who identify the inequitable barriers within Boston. Essentially, the I guess one you could reword it, say, achievement gaps in Boston, and we find interventions and resolves to those gaps. Oh, sorry, got distracted. But yeah, like in this society, it's simple that youth, all right, are going to control our future. All right. So when we can control the present, we need to control our future. And the youth are stuck behind because of adultist framing in our systems. And once they are able to do that, they control the youth's past, they're controlling the youth's present. And that's something that we have to make clear, that this generation is ours. So yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. And yeah, I completely agree with you. The idea that young people are leaders of the future always kind of doesn't sit well with me, because we know so many young people on this call who are leading right now. Merrit, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I don't know how I'm supposed to follow up Daniel's cool background. I'm in my grandma's kitchen, and he's got some cool stuff happening back there. Speaking of, but I'm Meredith. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior advisor at an organization called Student Voice. Also wearing another hat of I've been working with some folks in the youth organizing space to also figure out what this looks like at the federal government and then the Biden-Harris administration. So I'd say I got involved in this work. I'm old now, which is funny, but got involved when I was a junior in high school, and I'm now graduating from school in North Carolina because I imagine a lot of you was really interested in the money question. I was looking around my county where we had four different school districts in one county, and none of them looked the same. I grew up in the one that had the most Title I schools, and then the county next door had one Title I school, and at the same time, we had a big state lawsuit happening that I imagine a lot of the places you come from have had similar ones. And, the state ruled that minimally adequate education wasn't enough and that a lot of districts in our state weren't getting that. And that was being decided when I was a student in high school. And so I just started asking anyone who would meet with me to tell me about school finance and trying to kind of tackle that big question. And so I'm still stuck in it, and we haven't figured out school finance yet, but I'm eager to keep trying.
Well, and hopefully we can talk about resource distribution and other things on this panel, but I wanted to begin the conversation around this idea of tokenism. So a lot of you have been in positions where you've been the single student in a room of adult education policy decision makers. Oftentimes adults like to create those situations and then pat themselves on the back because they think that they've consulted students or that they think that they have incorporated student voice. So as individuals who have been put in that position, first of all, why is that risky? Why is it risky to have a single student representing in that room? And second, what do you all as leaders do to make sure that despite that situation that you are still endeavoring to kind of represent those students most marginalized by the system? And we can start with Ninah.
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I feel like it's necessary to kick off the conversation by saying that including a student in the room is the bare minimum a system can do. It's the bare minimum leaders in power can do, especially when you're talking about education, because of the mere fact that the entire system centers around the presence of students, the needs of students, the will, the yearnings, the ambitions of students. So it's insane to me to imagine an educational system, an educational decision-making body that leaves out the presence of student voice. To get to the first part of your question about why is it risky, I think it's for the mere fact that students and young people aren't a monolith. Again, as I mentioned in my opening statement, or my introduction rather, I represent 136,000 students in my school district. And I know that I come from a background, I have certain experiences, different means of thinking that maybe a majority of the student population that I represent don't. And so when you talk about having one student being at the table or having a seat at the table or being in the room, what happens is that it's very hard to extend yourself to make sure you're adequately representing all of those students. You try your hardest, but you can't, it's just something, again, that's extremely hard to do. And so it's my personal, thoughts that you should have as many students as possible in the room, as many different student voices, as many different students extending across different backgrounds, cultures, ways of living, socioeconomic strategies. But we don't currently have that. And so what I have to do is I have to build up my own systems and my own means and modes of communication and outreach to ensure that I'm representing as many swaths of students as I possibly can. So one of the first things I did when I became student member of the board is that I commissioned a student advisory council, 24 students from all between grade levels 6 through 12, even distribution of gender. At least one school was represented from each Board of Education district. And that is my first go-to when it comes to soliciting student opinion and soliciting student needs, because I realize that as a single individual with a single background and set of experiences, I can't possibly adequately represent everybody. And so that pot of student opinion is extremely important for me in my service to my community.
And Ninah, I appreciate how you've kind of used your position as a member of the board as somewhat of a Trojan horse to make sure that even more experiences can be represented. Emmanuelle, I know that in Kentucky, a big part of y'all's work is youth participatory action research. Can you talk a little bit about how your research helps to inform adult policy makers?
Absolutely. So we really believe that activism doesn't just look like being in the streets. that students do not just come to decision-making tables with lived experience, but also with expertise. Part of the way that we uncover that is through research. So in the midst of COVID, for example, as school closures ramped up, our team started just asking questions that we had been asking for a long time. But in this moment, they gained a different kind of traction, and our survey ended up garnering almost 10,000 responses from all but one county. And we use that data not only to inform the kinds of policy recommendations that we shared with school board candidates and town halls in partnership with Student Voice National, but also with each other. And we see this as a kind of shifting power, saying that, it's not only for legislators to have this kind of information at their fingertips. It's for us to have, and it's for us to democratize it. And so we have open sourced it, and we share it not only in kind of academic ways, but also casual modes from our podcast to our blog. So I think that informing decision makers is a huge piece of why we do this work, but it's also about reimagining what decision making looks like, even beyond a legislature or a school board or decision making council.
I think that's such a great point, Emmy. And I know that, right now nationally, adults are kind of finally talking more about this mental health crisis that's been emerging over the course of the past several months, while so many young people have had their routines disrupted. But I also know that the Kentucky Student Voice team had that data early because they were actually talking to students. And that's what policymakers need to be doing on a routine basis. Danyael, you're working with adults in the context of trying to figure out how to achieve justice and equity in Boston public schools. How do you, approach being the only student in the room?
I would not necessarily say that there is an approach, but rather a blatant expectation that the adults within that room must see eye to eye with me. In order to make true change, a substantial change, there has to be equal footing. And this change cannot be jeopardized by these prejudiced adultist feelings, all right? Because when there is one student in a room, that adult voice instantly is overpowering them, all right? And when that happens, those policies within themselves become the ideal of what the adult wants and not truly what will benefit the student. Now, me personally, I guess one would say approach is just simply to keep a smile on my face, listen to what they have to say, and put in my input, because that is the only approach that needs to be given to a student in a room working with adults, because necessarily we shouldn't even be treated as students once we are in that environment. We are now a colleague working together devoted to a cause. And because of that, there cannot be any labels or distinctions or anything.
I really like that framing, Danyael, and appreciate that. And Merrit, I know that you've also been in similar situations, and I've heard you talk a lot about ageism as well. And so if you could just talk a little bit, first of all, what is ageism? I think Danyael really just referenced it a little bit there. And then second of all, how do you manage being the only student in the room sometimes?
Let's see. So I refer to what systemically is called adultism. Now, ageism is strictly the discrimination of someone just due to their age. However, adultism kind of specifies that and narrows it down, whereas the adult-child relationship where the adult is showing discrimination towards the youth simply just because they are youth. Now, when combating against that and being in a single room, sometimes, unfortunately, you have to suck it up. But that doesn't mean you let your silence serve as compliance. You have to know how to properly persevere through such suppressions in order to actually implement your ideas within whatever, whatever policy you're trying to work on if you're a student working in a room with adults. So, yeah.
Merrit, why don't you jump in there as well?
Yeah, no, I think Daniel covered the ageism, adultism piece, but I think I don't have to tell any of y'all that adults are really not great at treating young people as equals, and have to be coached through what that looks like. Even though young people shouldn't be responsible for doing that coaching. I feel like most of the work I do is coaching districts and adults through how to meaningfully interact with young people and not only treat them as experts in their lived experience, but experts in so many things. Like in a moment when, we're doing virtual school and students are the ones having to help educators and their schools figure that out. We're experts in, technology and art and marketing and so many different things that we're not given credit for. And I think those things are just like really crucial when coming to tables. And I've gotten to the point where I don't come to a table unless I can bring multiple other young people. And I'm also at the point in my career where, as a white woman, I'm not the one who needs to be at the table. And I spend most of my time connecting folks to students, because the biggest thing is that, these people who work at districts, and I'm spending a lot of time now working with the federal government, they don't talk to young people. Young people aren't in their orbit. They're not in regular communication with young people. They don't even know how to find young people. And so really doing a lot of my work is just like doing the work of making those connections, making sure young people feel supported to be in those spaces and don't have to do the BS professionalism thing to feel like they have to be at that table and compete at that table. Because that really isn't what partnership is about.
And Merritt, you just referenced some of the work that you're doing with the federal government. I think some of us don't necessarily think of the federal government as a place where students should be having seats of power. So can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing and why it's important that even high school students, college students should be engaging directly with federal government sometimes?
I think now more than ever, we've seen why it's so crucial that young people are being meaningfully engaged in the federal government. We're in the midst of a lot of different dueling pandemics of racism and environmental action and, obviously COVID. And when the federal government, both like Congress and the White House, and I'm spending a lot of time looking at the Department of Ed, are not in conversation with young people, things happen like putting out stimulus checks where dependents who are, 16 to 24 aren't included. Those are kind of the conversations that happen when young people aren't at the table. And so a lot of that work is making sure that these people across departments, across issues are in conversation with young people, not only listening to, because I think that's, what this has been limited to in the past. They'll put on a cute event and have young people come in and do their photo op, but they have no follow-up, no action, no way of holding electeds and also just folks in the federal government accountable. And so I think what I'm hoping to do with some of the work we're doing through Youth and Gov, which I can share links to if you're interested in getting plugged in, is finding those policy-making spaces where young people can be brought in as experts and be not only at like tables where they're being listened to, but be at tables where policy is being made. We've called for every commission and task force at the Department of Ed to have at least 2 students so that there isn't, that continued tokenized student voice.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to me how many people think that they're engaged in the work to achieve education justice in our schools, but that aren't talking to students on a regular basis. Those people are all missing the point. Also, we talked a little bit about ageism, adultism, but Ninah, you and I were talking about this the other day about how there's also sometimes a racial element to this, and our teachers, our principals, our chief state school officers are all overwhelmingly white, but the majority of our students are of color. And so when we talk about increasing student power in our public schools, what we're really talking about is transferring power from a predominantly white set of leaders to students of color. But Ninah, what kinds of things can students do to promote education justice and equity, but without waiting for permission, or if they don't have your seat at the table? What kinds of things should they do to challenge these institutions?
Be present, show up, congregate, organize, mobilize. leverage the tools and the skill sets and the advantages that we have as young people to put the pressure on those in the rooms making the decisions. When we talk about representation and, who is kind of the face of power and pulling the levers, again, my school district is in a really unique situation because I go to a school, I live in a district, in a county, with people who look like me, who walk, talk like me, who experience the experiences I have experienced. I'm blessed to go to a school where I have a young Black woman as principal, where it's a young Black woman who leads my school district, where it's a young Black woman who leads my county, who leads the state's attorney's office. But the fact of the matter is that representation isn't always enough. The fact of the matter is that the systems that bind us and the systems we find ourselves entangled in are still based on principles and tenets that tend to not be, the most helpful to marginalized communities. So I would say, again, the most important thing you can do as young people, or the most important thing young people can do, is be present. Send that email, make that phone call, send that tweet, post that post on Instagram, because someone will see it. Students like to say all the time, well, Ninah, I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z at my school. The first thing I say is email me. For the mere fact, like, if nothing else, all my emails are public records. Your concern is noted in history. There is a paper trail of you continuously saying that, hey, there is a problem at my school. Hey, this pipe, there's mold in my school. Hey, this school lunch is not adequate enough. Hey, these SROs are putting the pressure on us. They're arresting Black and brown students. That's important. So that's what I would say is one of the most important things is, of course, not waiting for permission to make your voice heard and taking those steps to engage the decision leaders in that capacity.
And Emmy, I know that you've taken a look at this both in Kentucky and across the country, but when it comes to institutionalizing student voice and student power and balancing that with the need to kind of avoid tokenization, what kinds of things should district leaders, school leaders, teachers have on their mind if they are wanting to share power in this way or support students in shifting power in their districts, for those adults that are on the line?
The first thing I would say, which is a phrase that our team coined years ago, is this idea of students as partners. And the second, and that I think references mainly decision-making spaces, but decision-making spaces can be everywhere and everything. I think this week in the classroom, I had a teacher, a student was asking, if we go back in 2 weeks, is my college visit, is leisurely travel, do I still have to quarantine after that? And the teacher was saying, oh, technically yes, but if you don't, I don't think anyone will know. Or said at another point, should we really be shunning J.K. Rowling? And I think that what we don't see is that even that small interaction, that is power. The ability to shape the narrative in a classroom, that is power. And so the second piece that I would bring up specifically in light of the mental health crises compounding right now is a phrase that our team decided needed to accompany this idea of students as people. We didn't realize that it needed to be made explicit and made visible, but it does, the fact that students are people. And we are dehumanized constantly in the school building. Our bodies are policed, when we can eat, when we can drink, when we can go to the bathroom, how long we have to take a test. There's so much policing that happens, and students' humanity just has to be recognized at every turn.
I really appreciate that, Emmy. We got a question from Gabby, and I would love to give Gabby a chance to ask their question. So while we're getting Gabby promoted up here, I did, Daniel, want to just throw a quick question to you. As you're thinking about kind of you talked a lot about kind of the kind of respectability and trying to navigate how to interact with adults in this context. But can you just share a little bit about, like, from your perspective, how do you build working relationships with adults where you do feel valued? So, like, for an adult that doesn't get it, what can you do as a student to help to coach them and to help to make them listen?
In these circumstances, something that helps me build a relationship is just straight honesty. I will tell them when they are providing me lip service. I will tell them when they are treating me unfairly, and I will tell them that I'm not being treated equally as I should be in this workspace. And with that, essentially, it's just that grit that, for some reason, like, I don't mean to sound unprofessional when I say this. However, it's that grit that adults just eat up. They love to see they love to see that passion in students. But the thing is, they also like to take credit for that passion if they're working alongside a student. Now, that is something that is larger on its own. However, the thing about it is just that you can't always expect adults to be easy. They will always view you as a child. You can't necessarily get that through their head. So you kind of had to convince them, persuade them, do something, present an idea to them that will kind of make them see eye to eye with you. But frankly, the best way that I personally speaking, that I've done is just kind of letting the natural energy of things build a relationship. You can never force a relationship. All right. And that's something I also like to include. Although adults already kind of have this little idea of you and will discriminate you on that idea, it's never impossible to form a relationship. So time and patience with a little bit of grit.
Appreciate that. And I think Gabby's here to ask their question now.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask like a two-part question here. Like, do you have a plan B if you're not really feeling like you're listened to, or like you get a response that's like, good job, but we're not promising anything? And also, like, have you utilized like talking to journalists and media in your projects, and have you found that helpful?
Ninah, do you want to start with that one and pick it off to Merrit?
Yeah, I definitely can. Gabby, thank you for your question. This is something, a journey I contemplate all the time. So to start with the latter part of your question, the media. I try to really be cognizant and kind of pick and choose my battles when it comes to involving the media, only because as we've seen over the course of the past few years, the media can either be a friend or a foe. And it's very hard to control a story, to control a narrative. It's very hard to tell the truth and to share the facts when you leave that up to someone else's hands. I've seen situations in my school district that you thought would be like, hey, like, we can all agree unanimously, right? Like, something is up here, something's not right, or we can say, hey, we all agree, hey, the board voted unanimously on this item, we should all be ecstatic about it. And then someone hijacks the headlines. So I personally, I don't, my plan B isn't always to run to the media. When I feel like I'm not being listened to, this is where I come back to the idea of being present, mobilizing, and engaging the adults in the room. I sit on a board of 14 individuals. Again, I'm the only student. And one of the things I repeat to myself and I repeat to the adults in the room is that I am the only student representative on this board. I am the only representative of the constituency of the 136,000 students that reside and go to school in this school district. You do not want to pick a fight. You do not want to alienate. It would not be wise to do so. The only student stakeholder. In the event that they do, well, that's where mobilization comes into play. Again, I have these networks of students. I have my peers, my friends, individuals in my school district who I know are involved and engaged. And it takes nothing for me to send an email, to send a text message to say, hey, SROs are coming up on the board agenda. and a few of my colleagues aren't too firm on the issue, you guys should come over and testify. Hey, can you email us with your testimony, with your thoughts, your opinions, and share with us what you would like to happen? And I think adults kind of get a little shook, kind of get a little scared when, students show up in mass, because that's power. There's powers in numbers. So that's typically my plan B, my plan A, my plan Z, and everything in between. And it's gotten me this far.
Really key insight there on the narrative point with the media. The media, don't always trust them to share the narrative that you want. The most effective way to make sure that your narrative gets out there is if you share it yourself. And Merrit, I just wanted to let you respond to Gabby's question as well.
Yeah, no, I totally understand and have watched Ninah's point happen in real time. But we'll say, the media can be a powerful tool, especially when something's like very black and white, like this is something that needs to be amplified. And a school district isn't doing anything, they get really antsy when the media gets involved. And so we'll also offer, like now, that is a thing Student Voice always offers as support to young people who are seeing issues come up in their school districts. I mean, this week alone, we've had a lot of issues. There's been some weird stuff happening in Houston, one of the largest school districts in the country. And so, one thing we do is I try to connect students with journalists when I can and make sure that the media is directly talking to students and not just getting the adults' perspectives on these stories.
Merrit, I'm actually going to stick with you for a second because we got a question from Olivia. She asks, how have you dealt with youth, yourself or others, not being compensated for their work in adult spaces? Do you have any advice for how to have conversations with adult/adult organizations about the need for compensating youth for their labor, time, and expertise?
Always. Yeah, no, this is something I'm really passionate about. And I work a lot with Andrew on making sure that young people are absolutely compensated for their time. So I would say starting that conversation early before you get too far in is important. It might be work you want to engage in. And, there's been times where I've taken projects for free, but default, really trying to ensure that kind of upfront, asking something as simple as, is there a stipend available for this? Or is there money to have, or is there room to have a conversation about compensation? And just very casually mentioning that in an email can usually, they're surprised, but usually I think will react more favorably. There's incredible organizations like Pay Our Interns who are doing a lot of the work of collecting data about this and pushing for some bigger systemic changes to the internship side of this. But I mean, when you're giving your time to speak at an event, especially something I don't put together student panels anymore unless the organization has agreed to allow me to pay the young people who I'm going to put on them. And so I think that just being really, really key to making sure young people are compensated for their time, because it is hard work to get up and share your lived experiences, and young people should be paid for it.
Appreciate that, Merrit. I would love to, I'm going to answer, I would love Denise to be able to ask their question next. So if we could go ahead and promote Denise, but in the meantime, while we're waiting on that, Emmy, Daniel, I didn't know if you wanted to respond either to the question from Gabby or to the question on youth compensation.
One thing that I'll share is that when I was a freshman, we reported instances of sexual harassment and assault to our administration, and nothing happened. Their solution was to separate the group of women from the assaulter and say, we'll call it a day. You don't have to be in a class together anymore. And we were trying to talk about a larger problem. And that led to work that we did, the Student Voice team did with a group called She Matters. We collected data on that. And I think it combines part of what you're saying about when adults don't listen with the power of the media, because that data then that we collected, we were able to share out more widely. And the same principal who had said, no, you can't collect this data within the school building, ended up being quoted in a piece acting like he had supported it all along. So sometimes I think we shouldn't have to do this, but there's a lot of power in showing that we can skip levels. Okay, you're not going to respond. We'll go elsewhere and talk about this the systemic way it needs to be talked about.
And Emmy, I just want to stick with you for 1 second, because I also know that you all have dealt with retaliation, even from school leaders as you release data and information that's not necessarily the narrative that they want to push. How do you deal with retaliation in the context of kind of being a student?
We center, again, the humanity of young people. And as was mentioned earlier, we can't depend on other people to shape the narrative. So having our own outlets is really key. Sometimes even, a piece is written and will push out something else that complicates the narrative and nuances it. So I think having the supports available at all times, in whatever form that takes, but also stepping back and saying, okay, we're gonna add to this. We're gonna complicate this.
Thank you very much, Emmy. And I think we have Denise now. Denise, I loved your question. Go ahead and ask to the panel.
Hi, so I wanted to ask, how do you radicalize your peers when their minds are elsewhere or feel like their voices aren't enough and like they just feel like nothing will change?
I really appreciate that question, Denise. Daniel, I don't know if you have any advice for Denise, but I will say, we really, schools, just the cumulative effect of everything about school is to make young people feel like their voices and their minds don't matter. And so it does take something to overcome that, but it's important work because that is the prerequisite to achieving justice in our schools. Daniel, do you have any advice for Denise?
My advice would be to push past your limits. And I really do want to emphasize personal limits. Now, a lot of students or a lot of youth could be, taken away from the idea of your voice or feel like your voice is not enough because of the environment that they've been in, the way they think, essentially the way their mind works. And that's not something that can just be altered at the wave of a few words. Now, my overall advice when I say push past your limits is that you have to realize when you push past your limits, you have to also push out of your influences, your bounds, the norms of society itself. And instead of settling within the structure that you are in, the structure where you feel like your voice is not enough, you create your own structure in your head if you have to. A structure where you believe yourself, like, my voice will make an impact. Student issues need to be solved via student voice. All right, your voice truly will make an impact to a very larger cause. Now, whether you are able to utilize this and push forward with that is completely up to you. But I would just say personally that if you just feel like your voice is not enough, you just kind of need to step out of that mentality. It's kind of like an easier said than done thing, but that's the way I view it. You need to start to build yourself to the point where you realize, no, my voice will make a change. My voice will make a difference, and my voice will be heard.
Ninah, you represent over 100,000 students in Prince George's County. You made the decision that you need to do something, play an active role in improving your school. Kind of what led you to do that, and what advice do you have in response to Denise's question?
Yeah, so for me personally, my personal journey, it started with me asking questions. Similar to Merrit and what she spoke about with her experience, it's just like noticing things and like, okay, well, why is that the case? And it was literally as simple as that for me. But for a lot of people, it isn't. A lot of people, and not even just young people, but the populace in general, are apathetic. I think one of the problems is communication, right? There's a branding issue, there's a communication issue. You have a lot of these issues that are shrouded in jargon and academic language and big lofty terms. And most people just don't care for it. And it's not a bad thing. The fact of the matter is that we know what these issues are when they're simplified and reduced, right? At its core, we know what educational inequity is. We know what it looks like when one school in, the northern part of the county is getting more money than a school in the southern part of the county. We know what, desperate treatment between, a brown student and a white student looks like in regards to school security. And so it's about taking these big abstract ideas and communicating them in ways that allow students to relate to them on an individual personal level. I feel like that's one of the best tools that we have, and that's something I try to do, right? Data and numbers are cool, and those will come, but first let's get you a very foundational understanding of the issue at hand. The issue at hand is that you want ethnic studies in your school, you want to learn about Black history in your schools, and your school curriculum currently doesn't allow for that. The problem is that you've been suspended 4 times in the school year by your school, and they've all been for unjust reasons. Okay, so let's talk about that. And so for me, for a lot of these students, I'm their first step with elevating their concerns and allowing them to advocate for themselves. You send me an email, you shoot me a text message, you shoot me a DM. My response to you is, okay, let me go talk to the superintendent and I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. Okay, let me go talk to my board colleagues or my board chair and let's see what we can do for you in your situation. Let me email your principal for you. And that's what I try to be. I try to be their first step. I try to open those gates or those barriers for them so they have those tools of advocacy.
Appreciate you sharing that wisdom, Ninah. And we're heading right up on the 5 o'clock stop time here. So I just want to thank everyone for a really inspiring panel. And I cannot underestimate the insights and the value of the expertise that all of you have shared with us. I just also want to say, kind of while we've been on this, we've seen an impeachment kind of end over in the Senate following the kind of invasion of the United States Capitol. And so I want to remind everyone of something that Ninah said at the beginning, which is that schools are centers of our communities in so many ways. They're incubators for our democracy, and they're essential elements to making sure that we can live in a peaceful and just society. So do not underestimate the work that all of you are doing to improve our schools. And I hope that you'll stay dedicated to it, even when you're no longer a student. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, and I'll pass it back to Alexander.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you all so much to Student Voice, Prince George's County School Board, and Kentucky Student Voice team for reminding us all of the importance of not simply listening to students, but providing them the space and opportunity to affect real decision-making and to lend their expertise to our processes and policymaking. Truly inspiring and incredibly fierce and strong words.